The ship called Endeavour dropped out of faster-than-light travel and drifted toward the largest space station anyone on board had ever seen. Axiom Prime hung in the void like a metal flower, its petals stretching outward for thousands of kilometers. Lights blinked across its surface in patterns that seemed almost alive. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the observation window and felt her heart beating fast in her chest. That this was the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. First contact. Real first contact, not with one alien species, but with thousands of them. The Galactic Concord had existed for millions of years. They had watched humanity crawl out of caves, build cities, split atoms, and finally reach for the stars. And now, at last, they had invited Earth to join them. Elena straightened her uniform and turned to face her team. There were 12 of them in total. Scientists, linguists, military advisors, and diplomats. The best humanity had to offer. They had trained for this moment for years. They had prepared speeches, gifts, and proposals for cooperation. They were ready to show the universe what humans could do. The docking procedure took 3 hours. When the airlock finally opened, Elena stepped forward with her head held high. She expected ceremony. She expected crowds. She expected, at the very least, curiosity. What she found was a single alien waiting in an empty hallway. He was tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to shift colors in the light. His eyes were large and black, without any visible emotion. He wore simple robes that marked him as some kind of official. When he spoke, his words came through a translation device hanging from his neck. "Welcome to Axiom Prime," he said. His voice was flat and polite. "I am Sareth Kao. I have been assigned as your transitional liaison. Please follow me." Elena glanced at her team. They looked as confused as she felt. Transitional liaison? What did that mean? She had expected ambassadors, councils, maybe even celebration. Instead, she got one tired-looking alien who walked ahead of them without looking back. They followed him through corridors filled with beings of every shape and size. Some had wings. Some had tentacles. Some floated in the air without any visible means of support. None of them paid attention to the humans. A few glanced their way briefly, then looked away as if they had seen something boring. Sareth Kao led them to a small room with plain walls and simple furniture. He gestured for them to sit, then took his place at the head of the table. For a long moment, he simply looked at them with those empty black eyes. "I will explain your situation," he said finally. "The Galactic Concord is an alliance of 4,000 species. We have existed for over 3 million years. In that time, we have encountered countless new civilizations. Most of them follow a similar pattern. They develop technology, reach the stars, and then..." He paused. "They plateau. They stagnate. Eventually, they fade away." Elena felt cold. "I'm not sure I understand." "Your species has been classified," Sareth Kao continued, as if she had not spoken. "You are a Class 7 ephemeral species. This means you are short-lived, biologically fragile, psychically null, and technologically primitive by galactic standards. Based on our models, your civilization will likely plateau within the next 1,000 years and begin declining shortly after." The room was silent. Elena could hear her own breathing. She could feel the anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had not come here to fight. "With respect," she said carefully, "we have achieved faster than light travel. We have cured diseases that killed millions. We have built wonders that would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. Surely that counts for something." Sareth Kao tilted his head. The gesture seemed almost pitiful. "You have achieved faster than light travel after 200 years of research. The Velith, my own species, achieved it in 30. You have cured diseases, yes, but you still age and die within a single century. The average lifespan of a Concord citizen is 800 years. Some live for thousands. He leaned forward slightly. I do not say this to insult you, Ambassador. I say this so you understand your position. The Concord welcomes all species, but we do not pretend they are equal. You are new. You are young. You are, forgive me, temporary. My role is to help you adjust to this reality. Alana's team was stirring now. She could see the anger on their faces, the hurt, the disbelief. One of her military advisors, a man named Colonel Chun, looked ready to stand up and say something harsh. She caught his eye and shook her head slightly. What exactly does your role involve? She asked. I will help you navigate Concord bureaucracy, Sarathkeo said. I will answer your questions. I will prepare you for what is to come. Many species struggle with their classification at first. They rage against it, try to prove themselves, demand recognition. This is natural. It is also pointless. In time, you will accept your place, and you will find peace. The meeting continued for another hour. Sarathkeo explained the rules, the procedures, the expectations. He spoke about trade agreements and territory rights and cultural exchange programs. He was polite throughout, even kind in his own way. But underneath every word was the same message. You do not matter. You will never matter. Accept it and move on. When the meeting ended, Elena asked only one question. May we have access to your public libraries? Your histories, your scientific records, your cultural archives? Sarathkeo seemed surprised. Most new species demanded recognition, resources, respect. This human wanted only knowledge. Of course, he said. All public information is freely available to Concord members. Though I should warn you, it is vast. It would take your entire species several lifetimes to process even a fraction of it. That's fine, Elena said. We're patient. That night, Sarathkeo sat in his quarters and wrote his first report on humanity. He had done this many times before, for many species. The words came easily. Initial contact with species 4127, designated humanity, proceeded as expected. They showed typical signs of shock and denial upon learning their classification. Their ambassador asked minimal questions and made no demands. They requested only access to public archives, which was granted. Assessment: unremarkable. Prognosis: standard decline within projected time frame. No further attention required. He filed the report and moved on to other work. The humans would do what all the others had done. They would rage for a while, then bargain, then despair, and finally accept. It was the way of things. It had always been the way of things, but as he worked, a small thought nagged at the back of his mind. Something about the human ambassador bothered him. When he had delivered the news of their classification, she had not argued. She had not shouted or demanded proof or threatened consequences. She had simply listened, and then she had asked for books. Sarathkeo pushed the thought away. It meant nothing. Humans were just another dying species in a galaxy full of them. They would be forgotten within a few thousand years, just like all the others. He was wrong, of course. He would spend the rest of his very long life learning just how wrong he had been. But that night, in his comfortable quarters on Axiom Prime, he had no way of knowing that the quiet humans with their short lives and simple requests were about to change everything. They did not come to the stars to be remembered. They came to learn. And while the galaxy looked away, dismissing them as temporary and irrelevant, they watched. They listened. They studied. And they waited. 100 years passed. In the grand scale of the Galactic Concord, this was nothing. A blink. A breath. Species that measured their lives in millennia barely noticed the turning of a single century. Wars were planned over longer periods. Buildings took more time to construct. 100 years was simply not enough time for anything important to happen. Sarath Kyo was now 2,100 years old. His skin had grown paler with age, and his movements had slowed. He was entering the final phase of his life, the quiet centuries before the end. Most Velith spent this time in reflection, looking back on their long lives and preparing for what came next. Sarath Kyo had chosen to continue working, though his duties were lighter now. On a quiet afternoon, he found himself thinking about the humans. He had not thought about them in decades. After that first meeting, he had filed his reports and moved on to other species, other problems. The humans had faded into the background noise of the Concord, exactly as he had predicted. But something made him curious. A small voice in his mind, perhaps just the restlessness of old age, whispered that he should check on them, see how they were doing, confirm that his predictions had been correct. He accessed their file and began to read. At first, everything seemed normal. Humanity had expanded to 40 colony worlds in the past century. This was modest by galactic standards, but respectable for a Class 7 species. They had established trade relationships with several neighboring civilizations. They had caused no wars, filed no complaints, and made no demands. They had been, in every measurable way, completely unremarkable. Then Sarath Kyo noticed something strange. A medical report from the Kaurathi homeworld mentioned a new treatment for cellular decay. The treatment was revolutionary, extending healthy lifespans by nearly a century. The report credited a joint research team, but buried in the footnotes was a list of contributors. More than half of them were human. Sarath Kyo frowned and kept reading. An engineering journal discussed improvements to standard faster-than-light drives. The modifications increased efficiency by 12% while reducing fuel consumption. The article presented this as a natural evolution of existing technology. But again, the contributor list was full of human names. A physics paper explored new theories about subspace communication. A biology study revealed advances in genetic repair. An architectural review praised innovative new station designs. Over and over, in field after field, humans appeared in the footnotes and contributor lists. They were never the lead researchers. They were never the ones who received credit. They simply showed up, did good work, and disappeared back into obscurity. Sarath Kyo leaned back in his chair. His old hearts were beating faster than they should. He began searching more carefully. He found human engineers working on Concorde ships, quietly suggesting improvements that their supervisors then claimed as their own. He found human doctors treating patients in alien hospitals, developing techniques that other species took years to master. He found human scientists publishing papers in minor journals, papers that were later cited by major researchers without acknowledgement. The humans were everywhere. They were invisible, unnoticed, dismissed as temporary workers and minor assistants. But they were everywhere, and they were good. Better than they should have been. Better than any Class 7 species had ever been. Sarath Kyo contacted a young Velith scientist named Karath. She was assigned to a research station on the edge of human space, studying subspace communication. He asked her about the humans she worked with. "They are strange," Karath admitted over the communication link. "They work differently than we do. We take our time, plan carefully, think in long terms. They move fast. They make mistakes, but they fix them just as quickly. It is exhausting to watch, but I cannot deny the results." "What results?" Sarath Kyo pressed. Karath hesitated. "They have developed a new communication system. It transmits messages through subspace 40% faster than anything else in the Concorde." Sarath Kyo felt his blood run cold. 40%? That would be the greatest communication advance in 10,000 years. Yes, Why has this not been announced? Why has there been no celebration, no recognition? Karath made a gesture that translated roughly as embarrassment. I asked them the same question. One of the human engineers just shrugged and said, "You did not ask." They seem to have no interest in credit or recognition. They just work. After the call ended, Sarath Ko sat in silence for a long time. His mind was spinning with implications. He had spent 2,000 years studying civilizations, watching them rise and fall, predicting their trajectories with careful precision. He had never been wrong. Not once. But he had been wrong about the humans. He went back to their file and read it again from the beginning, this time looking for what he had missed. And slowly, terribly, he began to understand. The humans had not wasted their century arguing about their classification. They had not demanded respect or recognition. Instead, they had done something far more dangerous. They had accepted their position at the bottom and used it as cover. They had studied everything the Concord had to offer. They had learned from species with millions of years of knowledge. They had absorbed technologies and techniques and theories from across the galaxy. And then they had improved on all of it. Say Rath Ko requested an emergency meeting with the Concord's inner circle. These were the eldest and wisest beings in the galaxy, representatives of species that had existed since before most stars were born. They rarely met with anyone below their station. But Sarath Ko's reputation earned him an audience. He stood before them in a chamber of impossible beauty, surrounded by beings so old and powerful that simply being in their presence made his skin tingle. He told them what he had found. He showed them the data, the patterns, the implications. When he finished, there was a long silence. Finally, one of the elders spoke. Her voice was like wind through ancient trees. "You are concerned about a Class 7 species? They live barely a century. What could they possibly accomplish?" "I do not know," Sarath Ko admitted. "But that is what frightens me. We have measured them by our standards. Lifespan, technology, population. By these measures, they are nothing. But they are not measuring themselves by our standards. They are measuring themselves by something else entirely, something we do not understand." Another elder made a dismissive sound. "They are children playing in the gardens of their betters. Let them play. Eventually, they will tire and fade away, as all such species do." Sarath Ko wanted to argue, but he could see it was pointless. The elders had spent millions of years watching species come and go. They had seen countless young civilizations burn bright and then burn out. To them, humanity was just another candle flame, impressive for a moment but ultimately temporary. He left the chamber with a heavy feeling in his chest. He did not know what the humans were planning. He did not know what they wanted. But he knew, with the certainty of someone who had lived for over 2,000 years, that something was very wrong with his species' assumptions. The humans were not dying. They were not fading. They were not accepting their place at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. They were building something. Quietly, patiently, invisibly. They were building something that no one else could see. And by the time the galaxy noticed, Sarath Ko suspected it would be far too late to stop them. He returned to his quarters and updated humanity's file. Where before he had written, "No further attention required," he now wrote a single word: "Watch." It was not much of a warning, but it was all he could do. The rest was up to the universe itself to discover. The Varax came without warning. They tore through the edge of the galaxy like fire through dry grass, their bioships emerging from the void between galaxies in numbers that defied counting. They were not interested in communication. They were not interested in negotiation. They existed only to consume, and they had consumed dozens of galaxies before this one. The Galactic Concord had not fought a real war in 50,000 years. Their fleets were ancient, maintained more as symbols than as weapons. Their soldiers were ceremonial, trained for parades rather than battles. When the first Varax ships appeared, the Concorde responded with confidence. They had millions of years of technology and knowledge. Surely no enemy could stand against them. The first battle lasted 3 hours. The Concorde lost 17 ships. The Varax lost none. Their bioships adapted to every weapon within minutes, growing new armor, new shields, new defenses. What worked once never worked twice. The Concorde's ancient technologies, unchanged for millennia, became useless almost immediately. The second battle was worse. The third was a massacre. Within 1 month, 3 core worlds had fallen. Species that had existed for millions of years were simply gone, consumed by an enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped, could not even be slowed down. Panic spread through the Concorde like a disease. Ancient beings who had never known fear suddenly discovered what it felt like. Sarith watched the war reports with growing horror. He had lived for over 2,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall, but he had never seen anything like this. The Varax were not just an enemy. They were an extinction event. Then humanity made its request. Ambassador Marcus Vasquez, grandson of Elena Vasquez, stood before the Concorde Council and asked for permission to deploy the human fleet. His voice was calm and steady, showing no fear. The council members looked at each other with confusion. The human fleet? It was tiny by galactic standards. A few hundred ships at most. Against an enemy that had destroyed thousands? Your offer is appreciated, one council member said carefully. But surely you understand that your forces would be insufficient against such an enemy. We would not wish to see your species destroyed in a futile gesture. Marcus smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. With respect, Counselor, our species has been preparing for this moment for 100 years. We have studied your histories. We have analyzed every war ever fought in this galaxy. We have built our fleet specifically for enemies like the Varax. The Council exchanged glances. Most of them still thought of humans as temporary, irrelevant, a minor species not worth serious consideration. But they were desperate now, and desperation makes beings willing to try anything. Very well, the lead counselor said. You may deploy your fleet to the Meridian system. Our intelligence suggests the Varax will strike there next. If you wish to die nobly for the Concorde, we will not stop you. Marcus bowed his head slightly. Thank you, Counselor. We will not disappoint you. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived at Meridian's edge. There were 212 ships in total, most of them smaller than Concorde standard. They arranged themselves in loose formations that seemed almost random. Nothing like the precise geometric patterns that galactic military doctrine demanded. The Varax arrived with 3,000 bioships. Sarith watched the battle from a command station far from the front lines. He had requested permission to observe, driven by a need to understand that he could not fully explain. The tactical display showed the human fleet as tiny blue dots, almost invisible against the swarm of red that represented the enemy. They will be destroyed within minutes, a Concorde admiral said beside him. A brave gesture, but ultimately pointless. The first Varax ships engaged the human fleet. And then something unexpected happened. The humans did not fight the way other species fought. They did not form defensive lines. They did not protect their ships. They did not retreat when damaged. Instead, they attacked with a ferocity that seemed almost insane. Ships with critical damage continued firing until they exploded. Pilots flew their vessels directly into enemy bioships, detonating on impact. Crews overrode safety systems to squeeze out one more shot. One more second of combat effectiveness. A human destroyer. Its engines destroyed, and its hull breached. used its remaining power to accelerate directly into a Varax command ship. Both vessels vanished in a ball of fire. Before the debris had even cooled, 3 more human ships had done the same thing. The Admiral stared at the display with wide eyes. What are they doing? Those ships could have retreated. Those crews could have been saved. Sereth Kao watched the patterns of destruction with growing understanding. They are trading, he said quietly. They are trading their lives for enemy kills. That is madness. No species fights like this. The psychological cost alone would destroy them. No, Sereth Kao said. Not madness, purpose. The battle continued for 6 hours. Human ships fell by the dozens, but each one took enemies with it. The exchange rate was impossible by any conventional military calculation. For every human ship destroyed, 10 or 12 Varax bioships went with it. The Varax, for the first time in recorded history, seemed confused. They had fought countless species across dozens of galaxies. All of them had tried to survive. All of them had retreated when the cost became too high. The humans did not retreat. They pressed forward, harder and harder, spending their lives like currency in exchange for enemy deaths. And the Varax, who had never encountered anything like this, did not know how to respond. When the battle finally ended, 180 human ships had been destroyed. But the Varax had lost over 2,400 bioships, including several command vessels. It was the first significant victory against the invaders since the war began. Sereth Kao stood in silence as the final numbers came in. The Admiral beside him was pale, his hand shaking slightly. How? The Admiral whispered. How can they fight like this? How can they accept such losses? Sereth Kao thought about the humans he had met over the years. He thought about their short lives, their quick movements, their strange intensity. He thought about Ambassador Elena Vasquez and her quiet request for knowledge. He thought about the engineers and scientists who worked without seeking credit. He thought about a species that lived barely a century and yet seemed to accomplish more in that brief span than beings who lived for thousands of years. They are not afraid of dying, he said finally. They are afraid of not mattering. They live such short lives that every moment carries weight. Every choice carries meaning. They do not fight to survive. They fight to make their deaths count for something. The Admiral shook his head, unable to understand. But Sereth Kao understood. He had been watching humanity for 115 years now, and he finally understood what he had been seeing. The humans were not trying to live forever. They had accepted that they could not. Instead, they had turned that limitation into a weapon. They fought with the fury of beings who knew their time was short, who knew that every second mattered, who knew that the only immortality they would ever achieve was in the memory of their deeds. A message arrived from the human fleet. It was brief and direct, sent to the entire Concord. We have studied your enemy. We know how to kill them. But you need to understand something. This is what we were made for. Our lives are short. Our bodies are fragile. But we have spent our entire existence learning one lesson that longer lived. Species have forgotten how to make death mean something. Let us show you. Sereth Kao read the message twice. Then he began writing his own report, the most important report of his long life. It would take him days to finish, but he knew what it needed to say. The universe had made a mistake about humanity. They had measured the wrong things. Lifespan, technology, population. These things did not matter, nearly as much as everyone had assumed. What mattered was will. What mattered was purpose. What mattered was the ability to look death in the face and say, "You do not frighten me. I will make you serve my cause." The humans had that ability, and now the galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant. 50 years after the last Varax bioship fled the galaxy, The universe had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The war was over, one at a cost that still seemed impossible to calculate. Humanity had lost nearly 40% of its population. Entire colonies reduced to memorial worlds, generations erased from existence. By any conventional measure, they should have been devastated. Broken. Finished. Instead, they were thriving. Human colonies spread across hundreds of new worlds, their population recovering with a speed that amazed longer-lived species. They built and grew and expanded, not with the slow patience of ancient civilizations, but with the urgent energy of beings who knew their time was limited. Every year mattered. Every decade was precious. They could not afford to waste a single moment. Sarathkeo, now in his final decade of life, spent his remaining years writing a history of humanity. It was the first true history ever written about them, the first attempt to understand not just what they had done, but why they had done it. The book became required reading across the Concord, translated into thousands of languages, studied by species that had never given humans a second thought. He called it the ephemeral fire, how mortality became strength. The Concord itself had transformed. The old classification system was abolished, replaced by something more nuanced, more humble. Humanity was designated as a class prime catalyst species, recognized not despite their short lives, but because of them. They had shown the galaxy that there were forms of strength that could not be measured in years or technology or population. But the greatest change was philosophical. Long-lived species began to question assumptions they had held for millions of years. If short-lived beings could accomplish so much with so little time, what did that say about beings who had eternity and accomplished nothing? If mortality could be transformed into purpose, what did that mean for civilizations that had forgotten what purpose felt like? A new movement emerged among the elder races. They called it living mortal. Its followers chose to limit their own lifespans, artificially ending lives that could have continued for centuries more. They believed that mortality created meaning, that the awareness of ending gave weight to every moment. It was controversial, even scandalous by ancient standards. But it spread. Karth, now over 200 years old and one of the most respected scientists in the Concord, was among the first Velith to join the movement. She had never forgotten James, the dying soldier who had smiled at her and explained what it meant to spend a life wisely. His words had changed something inside her, opened a door that she had not known was closed. She traveled to old Earth to see where humanity had begun. The planet was a memorial world now, preserved in honor of the species that had emerged from it to save the galaxy. Forests covered the continents, broken only by monuments and markers honoring the fallen. The air was clean, the skies were clear, and silence hung over everything like a blessing. She found Sarathkeo there, sitting beside a monument that bore the names of every human who had died in the war. He was very old now, his skin almost translucent, his movements slow and careful. But his eyes were sharp, and when he saw her, he smiled. "You came," he said. "I had to," Karth replied. "I needed to understand." They sat together in silence for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky. Finally, Sarathkeo spoke. "I have spent my entire life studying civilizations," he said. "I have watched them rise and fall, predicted their trajectories, documented their histories. I thought I understood how the universe worked. I was certain that longevity was the key to everything. That species with more time would always accomplish more than those with less." He gestured toward the monument, toward the thousands of names carved into the stone. "I was wrong. Time is not what matters. Will is what matters. Purpose is what matters. The capacity to look at your own limitations and say, 'This will not define me. This will not stop me. This will make me stronger.'" Karth nodded slowly. "James told me something similar," before he died. He said that his people had learned to spend their lives wisely because they had no choice. They could not afford to waste a single moment. And yet they taught us, Sereth Ko said. They taught us that we have been wasting millions of moments, billions of them, living without urgency, without meaning, without purpose. They burned brighter in a century than we managed in a million years. Not because they were better than us, but because they had no time to be anything less than their best. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small data chip. My final work, he said. The last chapter of my history. I want you to read it when I am gone. Kureth took the chip carefully. What does it say? Sereth Ko was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and for a moment, he looked almost young again. It says what I have spent my whole life trying to understand. It says that eternity is not living forever. Eternity is being remembered. And these brief, burning, beautiful creatures, will be remembered longer than stars. He died 3 days later, peacefully, surrounded by friends from a dozen different species. Kareth was there at the end, holding his hand just as she had held James's hand so many years before. And when it was over, she wept for him too, not because his life had been short, but because it had been full. Years passed, decades, centuries. The war with the Virax became ancient history, then legend, then something close to myth. New generations were born who had never known fear of extinction, who had never seen a bioship or watched a world burn. But they remembered the humans. They told stories about them, wrote songs about them, built monuments to them. A young alien child, barely a decade old, asked her teacher one day why the humans were so important. The teacher paused, considering how to explain something so vast to someone so small. Because they knew something we had forgotten, she said finally. They knew that a life is not measured by its length, but by its weight. And they carried more weight in a century than we managed in a million years. But they died, the child said. They died so much faster than us. Yes, the teacher agreed. They died. But they died for something. They died protecting others, saving worlds, fighting enemies that wanted to destroy everything. They turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. They were fury made flesh, not loud, not boastful, but silent. The kind of fury that builds and waits, and when the darkness came, burned brighter than anything we had ever seen. The child thought about this for a long time. Did they conquer the galaxy? No, they saved it. And they did it by being exactly what we pitied them for, mortal. On old Earth, the monuments still stood. Names carved in stone, stories preserved in crystal, memories kept alive across the centuries. The humans had not sought immortality. They had known from the beginning that they could not live forever. But they had found something better than living forever. They had found meaning, and in finding it for themselves, they had given it to the universe. They had taught the oldest species in existence that time was not a gift, but a responsibility. That every moment mattered. That every life, no matter how brief, could shake the foundations of eternity. The stars continued to burn, as they always had, as they always would. But now, scattered among them, there were worlds that remembered. There were species that understood. There were beings who looked up at the sky and thought of the small, fragile, magnificent creatures who had come from a tiny blue planet and changed everything. The humans had lived briefly. They had died often, but they had never been forgotten, and in the end, that was all that mattered. 6 months into the war, the Galactic Concord did something it had never done in 3 million years of existence. It handed military command to a Class 7 species. The decision was controversial, painful, and humiliating for many elder races. But the alternative was extinction, and even the proudest civilizations chose survival over pride. Admiral Marcus Vasquez stood before the combined war council. Human and alien together, and unveiled what the humans called the mortal doctrine. He spoke calmly, without drama, as if explaining something obvious that everyone else had somehow missed. "You have been fighting this war wrong," he said. "Not because your technology is inferior, but because your psychology is unsuited to this enemy. The Varax adapt to weapons. They cannot adapt to will." He displayed tactical data from the past century of human preparation. The humans had studied every war in Concord history, every victory, every defeat. They had analyzed patterns that species living thousands of years had never noticed, simply because they had never needed to look. "Long-lived species fight to survive," Marcus explained. "You retreat when losses mount too high. You preserve your forces for future battles. You calculate acceptable casualties and withdraw when the numbers become unfavorable. The Varax have learned to exploit this. They push until you retreat, then advance and push again. It is a simple strategy, and it has worked for them across dozens of galaxies." He changed the display to show human battle formations. "We do not retreat. We do not calculate acceptable casualties. We fight until we win or until there is nothing left of us to fight. The Varax have never encountered an enemy like this. They do not know how to respond." A Velith admiral raised his hand. "With respect, Admiral Vasquez, this approach will result in massive human casualties. Your species cannot sustain such losses indefinitely." Marcus nodded. "You are correct. We estimate that the human population will decline by 30 to 40% before this war ends. Many of our colonies will be depopulated. Entire generations will be lost." The room fell silent. Such losses were unthinkable to species that measured their existence in millions of years. To deliberately accept such devastation seemed like madness. "You must understand something," Marcus continued. "To you, 1,000 years is a reasonable planning horizon. To us, it is 10 lifetimes. We do not think in long terms because we cannot afford to. Every human in this room will be dead within a century, regardless of what happens in this war. The question is not whether we will die. The question is what our deaths will mean." He paused to let this sink in. "We have spent our entire existence learning how to spend our lives wisely. Now we will spend them for the galaxy." The mortal doctrine was implemented across all fronts. Human officers took command of mixed fleets, teaching alien cruise tactics that seemed suicidal but proved devastatingly effective. Human engineers developed weapons designed to be used once, by soldiers who would not survive to use them again. Human scientists created technologies that would kill their users along with the enemy, trading lives for strategic advantages. Karath, the young Velith scientist, was assigned to work directly with human researchers on a new weapon system. She spent weeks living among them, watching them work, trying to understand how they thought. One evening, she sat with a dying human soldier in a medical bay. His name was James, and he had been wounded in a boarding action against a Varax bioship. The doctors had done what they could, but his injuries were too severe. He had perhaps a day left. "Why are you smiling?" Karath asked. She could not understand how someone facing death could look so peaceful. James turned his head toward her. His eyes were bright despite the pain. "Because it worked. We killed the bioship. 40 of us went in, and only 3 came out. But the ship is gone. That is a good trade." "You are dying," Karath said. "How can that be a good trade?" James was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed softly, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "How old are you?" 143 years. "And how long will you live?" "Perhaps another 800 or 900 years if I am fortunate." James nodded slowly. "I am 31 years old. Before I was wounded, I maybe had 60 more years ahead of me. 60 years of getting older, weaker, slower. 60 years of watching my friends die one by one. 60 years of wondering if any of it mattered. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but warm. You have centuries to make your life mean something. I had decades. And now I have spent those decades in the best way possible. I protected people. I saved lives. I helped stop an enemy that wanted to consume everything. My life was short, but it was not wasted. Kareth felt something she had never felt before. Not pity, exactly, but a kind of awe. This dying creature, with his brief span of years and fragile body, had found something that her own long-lived species had lost. He had found meaning. You cannot understand, James said gently. You have too much time. When you have centuries ahead of you, nothing feels urgent. Nothing feels precious. But when you have only years, every moment burns bright. Every choice matters. Every day is a gift that you must use or lose forever. He died that night, still smiling. Kareth stayed with him until the end, holding his hand as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. And when it was over, she wept for him in a way that Veleth rarely wept for anyone. The War Council received regular reports from the front lines. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. Human-led fleets were pushing the Varax back, reclaiming systems that had been lost, rescuing populations that had been written off as doomed. The cost was enormous, but the results were undeniable. Sareth Kao, now serving as a liaison between human and Concord forces, attended a memorial service for fallen human soldiers. He expected it to be somber, filled with grief and despair. Instead, he found celebration. Families shared stories of their lost loved ones, laughing at memories, celebrating achievements, honoring sacrifices. There were tears, yes, but there was also joy. You do not mourn like other species, he observed to a human officer standing nearby. The officer, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, nodded. We mourn the loss, but we celebrate the gift. Every life is borrowed time. Every death is the repayment of that debt. What matters is what we do with the time we are given. She gestured toward the crowd. My son died at Meridian's edge. He was 24 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him by your standards. But he chose to spend that life protecting others. He gave it freely, gladly, for something greater than himself. How can I not celebrate that? Sareth, Kao had no answer. He had lived for over 2,000 years, and he had never once thought about what his life meant. He had simply existed, moving from day to day, century to century, assuming that length of life was the same as quality of life. But these short-lived creatures had discovered something that he and his kind had missed. A transmission arrived from the front lines. The Varax Queen, the central intelligence that guided the entire invasion, had sent a message. It was the first communication they had ever received from the enemy. The message was brief, translated roughly through captured bioship systems. The short ones are wrong. They do not fear the end. They welcome it. They use it as a weapon against us. We cannot adapt to beings who do not wish to survive. Withdraw from their sectors. Avoid contact. They are poison. The War Council received the message in stunned silence. For the first time in recorded history, the Varax were afraid. Not of weapons or technology or numbers. They were afraid of will. They were afraid of beings who had transformed the greatest limitation of their existence into their greatest strength. Marcus Vasquez read the message twice, then set it aside. They are beginning to understand, he said quietly. But the lesson is not over yet. We still have work to do. He turned to face the council, his face set with determination that seemed to radiate from somewhere beyond his physical form. We did not come to this war to survive. We came to win. And we will not stop until the Varax learn the full meaning of human resolve. The council members, human and alien alike, rose to their feet. For the first time since the war began, there was genuine hope in the room. Not hope for survival, exactly, but hope for something greater. Hope for victory. Hope for meaning. Hope that all the sacrifice and suffering would count for something in the end. The humans had taught them that. And the galaxy would never be the same.